Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. We're going to taste some Colombia coffees today. These are coffees that are coming in. When are they due, Dan?
Probably in about, I think they'll arrive down in Texas in a couple weeks, and then we're going to truck them up to the annex from there.
Okay.
So we're
Why are
taking,
we shipping to Texas?
well, for those of you who have not seen the congestion that we're experiencing at the Port of Oakland, or really all of the West Coast ports right now, it's just been absolutely insane and impacted by, a myriad of reasons, but just a surge in consumer goods being shipped overseas. So we've been we've been seeing about a 4 week turnaround on most of our containers of coffee from when they land at the port here in Oakland, or there in Oakland. I'm in Seattle. To us getting those in our warehouse, and so and that doesn't account for the delays between the two ports, the port of destination and the arrival port. So we've decided to move coffee out of a lesser used port in Colombia, and it's going to go to Houston, which isn't seeing the same kind of problems that we're seeing. And believe it or not, that journey coupled with a quick stint on a truck to Oakland is quicker than if we were to do the normal route.
Yeah, it's been a huge issue for us, and that's why I actually these are coffees that are en route. So what's the ballpark on them arriving? Even though everything's been kind of delayed and sort of all the normal calculations are blown out of the water in a way. But when do we think we'll have these coffees?
I think we'll have these by middle of October.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, I actually just cleared a table of new offers because we're already looking at the next container of small lots because we're so concerned that if we delay that, it's good timing to buy a second container and just on the crop cycle. And if we delay anything, we're going to not have any Colombia for a really long time. So we're just trying to plan ahead and account for all this. But we're only going to taste 4 coffees. And how many lots are actually in the container?
Oh my gosh, I meant to look at that number before getting on this call, but I think there's 12. There's 12 total. Which is pretty typical for our Colombia boxes. It's 300 or 285 bags split between 10 to 12 coffees.
Right. And if we approve lots separately, and then we bulk them into small micro-regional or sometimes single farmer lots if they're big enough. But we can't import 2 bags. Some of the lots we approve are 2 bags.
Yeah.
So it would be incredibly complicated logistically. And in fact, we think there's a little bias going on with the types of coffee we import, where we're importing micro lots in a container they're complicated containers because each lot has a different ICO number, right?
Yes.
So it's considered like it's a huge lot.
Mm-hmm.
So when they arrive at the port, we think that they're prioritizing full containers of one coffee, more commercial or low-grade specialty instead of these sort of complicated micro lot containers. So yeah, there's a factor there. It's more work. What we do is more work for them, as not only us. But anyway, we're trying to stagger this so that we can talk about the coffees and taste them. Maybe we want to smell them now, the dry grounds, and just make some comments. I'm not going to write anything down on this because we've cut these a million times. But
yeah, sure.
Yeah, are you ready to just dive in? Why don't you start with the first one and just mention where it's from and give a couple, anything you're smelling.
So this first coffee is from Inza, which is in Cauca, down sort of south in Colombia. And we have been buying coffee there through a family who have a warehouse operation in San Antonio town. And when I say warehouse, I mean, I'm not talking about a giant factory warehouse. They have they built a storage facility next to their home and store. And essentially what they do is they buy coffee from their neighbors and people from neighboring towns. And they have a coffee lab that they set up in there where they can evaluate coffee. And then they sell that coffee to an exporter who we work with. So this coffee in particular is from San Antonio town, so it's from the town that this buying operation is in.
Yeah, there's coffee just all over, right? I mean, the town itself is at a high altitude.
Yeah, it's 1,800
coffee right behind the home.
Meters. Yeah, there's coffee all around all the yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is sweet. It's got some of that really, it's interesting because we talk about sugars, this, and it's like you don't really think of the smell of sugars, but really good raw sugar has a lot of aromatic. I mean, it can have fruit, it can have vanilla, and be really complex kind of sweetness. Kind of, it can incorporate other types of sweeteners like date sugar sometimes, which I get a little bit of here. But what's fun is that Colombia itself produces panela, which is like one of the best raw sugars in the world, I think, and has all kinds of local flavors and the methods they use and stuff. It's produced in it like coffee in small, what do they call those that they cook them down in? I can't remember.
Well, there's the trapiche is what.
Trapiche, yeah.
That's what I was thinking of when I smelled this coffee. It just reminds me of panela, and I don't know how much of that has to do with the fact that the family who have this buying operation also sell panela out of their store. So they have.
Oh, they do.
They have a trapiche up at Doña Rosa's farm. So. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even know that. Yeah. Yeah, it's just, it's hard to describe. Sometimes coffee aromatics especially hit me as, not this particular coffee, but you think like that's like a blueberry bran muffin. And then that's like a complex set of flavors. And then you want to break it apart into it has a little bit of graininess, but it has this kind of rustic sweetness. And then there's fruit. And you sort of have to suss out of that what the individual aromatics are. But I think in the case of Colombia, when you get this really complex sugars, you actually kind of almost have to do the same thing, because I think there's vanilla, I think there's traditionally what we call molasses, there's some fruits. Can't name the fruit really, it's a little bit raisiny, but
we could go to the next one, but it makes me think like what you're saying just reminds me of, one of the functions of cupping is to evaluate a large swath of coffees at one time, which you couldn't do if you had to brew them. And sometimes I have to go back to that first cup, like the one we're smelling now, and smell it again, because then I'm able to sort of compare it to others. And I think a lot more is revealed as I work my way through a table. So,
yeah. Well, let's move on to the second one, which is Kaisedo. This is single farmer, not from a region.
Yeah, this is from Caicedo, which is sort of northwest of Medellin, and the exporter we work with is in Medellin. It's the areas logistically makes a lot of sense for those guys to buy from, because they can drive there in just a few hours. It also happens to be next to Urao, which is, if you've bought Colombian coffee from us, you've probably seen coffees from Urao on our list. And I think both areas tend to produce some pretty fruit-forward coffee for washed coffee. And maybe some of that has to do with the cold water that they have access to. It sort of slows down the fermentation time. So you see really long fermentation times in that area. But they also tend to mix multiple days of multiple harvest days, which I think is an interesting aspect, especially considering, 10 years ago, that was, nobody would have really talked about that. It was sort of a no-no, at least thought to be, for best post-harvest processing practices. But
I think it still is a no-no, but it's kind of a whole conversation. These fermentation, these small farmers, the way they are fermenting kind of without unintentionally has resulted in some really interesting qualities. But
and in an area like around Caicedo, it makes sense because they're using really cold water. So I mean, you wouldn't do this in a lower elevation area where they don't have that cold water to slow things and keep the pH at a safe level. So
what are you getting from this?
I get a lot of spice kind of right off the bat, sort of like a clove spice or something. I mean, maybe not like some of what I would expect from Burundi or Rwanda, but there's something about the raw sugar, and I mean maybe it has it's some of this dried fruit that I also get in there, raisin, that together signals.
By the way, just technique wise, we're both funny because a lot of most cuppers, some people, you just want to get your nose up to the cup to smell it, and some of us shake it, and I've always used my heel of my hand, and it's part of just you're losing aromatics when you're smelling aromatics, but you're trying to get you're trying to just help your nose get something out of it. You always got to get your nose in it. Anyway, I get some very delicate fruits. I'm actually surprised because I know I have a bias since this is not a blind cupping. I know this was one of my favorite coffees. I think this was one of our highest scoring.
Yeah, it is.
It's not blowing me away here in terms of the aromatics, and I think I remember it being really, really sort of standing out. But I get this very clean fruit in it. It's not like those Ural coffees that are kind of like really pushing it in terms of the winey and rustic elements of the fruit. This is pretty clean, pretty sick. Yeah. But well, let's move on because I want to move to phase 2. So now we have Buesaco, the Alianza Granjeros. That's the co-op, right?
It's an association, which they buy from hundreds of farmers in the area there in Buesaco and around Buesaco. I guess the difference between the association and the cooperative is you don't have to be a member to sell your coffee there. But they are, in terms of transparency, they offer the same, level of recording farmer deliveries and how much farmers are paid. So,
I mean, Colombia, all Colombia, and regionally, if I'm not mistaken, has a minimum payment, which is set by the Federación, the FNC. So there's a kind of built-in fairness scheme, like no farmer in Colombia who happens to be in a remote area and they don't have much information or whatever, they can't be underpaid because there's essentially a minimum wage or minimum payment. However, in competing for quality coffee in certain regions, the competition itself tends to create its own minimums, which is higher. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, you have buyers that have quality incentives and stuff, programs and second payments and stuff when a coffee sells for higher. So there's quite a good structure for rewarding farmers, in Colombia. And and I what I really like about Pergamino, in fact, is they rely on these local partners, but they also kind of like help the local partners become little entrepreneurs in their own area. Right. So in a sense, like in San Antonio, I mean, it's not like Pergamino wants to move in there and have an empire and put the Pergamino office in there. They want a local person who knows the area to grow their potential earnings by becoming a local buyer, setting them up with a warehouse, sharing the knowledge and stuff. So, well, anyway, I do think this is very sweet, and it stands out for its kind of clarity, sort of well-defined aromatics. And then we should check out our last one, which is...
So this is Aponte honey, and the people of Aponte are they're of Inga descent, which is a pre-Colombian ethnic group that are related to the Incas. And the region it's pretty close to Buesaco town, maybe about an hour from there, in a Paramo area. It's unique in that you see a lot of honey processed coffee there, and I think like in terms of honey processing, it's not. I think the look of the coffee can be a little bit more rustic than maybe like a honey you've seen from Costa Rica, because they're not processing coffee at collecting coffee and then processing large amounts at a giant mill. This is all still sort of home processed coffee, where each farmer is depulping the coffee and then they're drying the honeys themselves.
Right.
And so I think that's
Yeah, honeys are always strange to me because the aromatics tend to be a little bit less impressive. They always score a little lower on the aromatics and then kind of recover that in the cup flavor, certainly in body, because I think you're going to have more solids in a honey. I think generally, that I think that's true. It seems to be true, and but I'm always prepared to be a little underwhelmed in the aromatic portion of evaluation. So
right.
So hey, I'm gonna pour my water. Should we try to get Leo involved, or maybe you can introduce? You can talk.
I'm gonna send those guys a message, and we'll get Pergamino on the call. They're gonna join us to talk a little bit about
Pedro and Leo.
Yeah, the buying behind these coffees. So.
Hello.
Hey guys.
Hey Pedro, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you really well. I'm trying to
cool.
figure out my camera here.
We got you.
Okay. Good to see you.
Yeah, the same.
Good. Are you in Medellin?
Yeah, I'm in Medellin. I'm currently in the office, and Leo was getting to the warehouse because we had a meeting here, and he was running to the warehouse because he needed to do something there. So he's going to connect from the warehouse. He should be hopping on any minute.
Oh, I thought he was going to be down in Narino.
He was in Tolima this week, but he arrived yesterday evening. So he will be, hopefully we'll be able to try to hop on.
Oh, okay, great.
Can you hear me well? I don't have my headphones thing on.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Right.
Yeah, so we were cupping these 4 coffees, and we're just about to break the crust, and we talked a little about them without you guys, so we can say what we really think. Just kidding. No, so yeah, we were just gonna go through them, break them, talk a little about them. We talked about trying to cup the same coffees together, right? But
we just we had some issues today, and I'm traveling on Monday, so we were kind of running a little bit today, and Leo was getting from Tolima, so we couldn't get our act together. I'm really sorry. But we have cupped them before, and we know them well, but it would have been nice to be able to cup them together, obviously.
Yeah. Well, we're trying to get used to this format. I mean, the idea is like we could have a conversation, and it's how much incredibly better it is to have people who actually know and source and are the source of these coffees to be involved. So that's enough. And we were trying to keep it simple because we've never done this before. And honestly, I really kind of hate the idea of I really like to demystify cupping. Do you guys do cupping? Because you have the cafes. Do you do cupping in the cafes, or did you use
like public cuppings?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when we're actually, so we're doing a lot of cuppings for our own staff, which has been something that we've kind of tried to strengthen in our training program, because we realized that we were telling them a lot about coffee, a lot about origin, a lot about, what made coffee different and every origin different. And then we were focusing a lot on espresso and pour overs, etc. And we weren't strengthening enough the actual capability of cupping and, the process and distinguishing between the subtleties. And so we've been strengthening that, but we also have public cuppings, but we tried initially to do them like traditionally, like lab cuppings, like you guys are doing now. Mm-hmm. And we felt that half of the time was trying to get people to wrap their heads around the actual process and not so much about really distinguishing the differences. So we've been doing a lot more kind of 101 coffee classes where we make coffee in different types of methods and kind of discuss them more freely and more less structurally, I guess. But we are hoping we have a project to have a much bigger training lab here in the city, and the idea is to start to do a lot of more public stuff with our customers as well in the cafes.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I always found, when I've been to your cafes in Medellin, the staff really has a very honest and connection to the coffees they serve. They always are slightly excited or hey, this is really good. And I found it really, they seemed pretty genuinely in touch with what they were serving,
Well, that says a lot, and thanks for bringing it up. Yeah, it's something that we try hard. It's hard as we grow, because we don't plan to be a chain or anything, but just the complexity of having more than one store has made it super hard to keep everything at the same level, and start getting people that bigger groups that is harder to get them as knowledgeable and as but yeah, it's a constant challenge.
Should we break these, Tom?
Yeah, we're ready to break. So what we did is we poured a cup early on, so we'd have something ready to cup, so we didn't have to wait. Because I usually wait 18 minutes. I don't know why it's 18 minutes till I can taste something.
We do it 23.
I need it cool. And the idea is mouth temperature, actually, or you don't want to be below mouth temperature, else you actually can't taste, and you don't want to have a pain response. So I don't know, have you ever heard a temperature range that's supposed to be ideal for coffee? I don't know. People figure it out themselves.
Yeah, I don't know I don't talk about it technically in terms of exact temperature, but we do, I know that within the protocol, you should cup when it's really hot, and I've talked to cuppers that actually like to cup really hard. It's just us and the team and Leo and everybody, we never really cup when it's hot. It's just we can't feel a thing. We usually wait, and obviously here it's a little warmer, so we usually wait between 20 and 23 to actually dive in, and actually for us the best is the last round where it's really at room temperature. I feel that's where everything really opens up, everything positive, everything negative.
Yeah.
But that's always the discussion between the reality of how people drink coffee and how we cup coffee. And it's sometimes we feel that we're, distancing ourselves. A lot of people drink coffee really hot right out of the pot. Sure. So it's all right, should we understand how it feels really hot out of the pot? Or
there's also, I think the problem of just intake, and think of cupping as a tool, like you said, for a way of maybe parsing out difference or flavor notes. That's one function of cupping, but then just the efficient side of cupping, you're evaluating hundreds of samples at a time, and Tom and I have to cup those 65 samples you just sent us. And I think cupping a coffee when it's hot, since it makes it a little bit more difficult to read, you wind up over tasting a coffee. And when you're talking, the magnitude of hundreds, it's a lot of caffeine to take in. Even though you're spitting, you're absorbing.
Hey guys, I want to focus for a second on the coffee, just because we broke the first one, and we're not making any notes. We're just talking about it, but it's had a little greenness in it for me, Dan, but I don't think that's really, I think that's just me this morning. It's not something I usually...
It could be, maybe it's just the light roast. I find it really sweet and in line with the dry fragrance, just kind of that panela raw sugar sweetness. Oh, Leo's going to join.
Yeah.
1 second.
Oh, there's Leo.
Hello, Leo.
Hello.
Hey, L stands for lurker.
Hey,
oh, there he is.
Hey, you're catching up.
How's it going? Yeah. We're just jumping into breaking these crusts, which we better focus on for a second. Yeah. See, this is the problem with a really social cupping, is you forget the coffee. You're talking, and then you're like, oh wait, coffee.
Ideally,
every time you talk you cup with Leo, you end up talking about Greek philosophers or something. It's what were we really cupping again?
That's true.
Ideally, you break the wet grounds between 3 to 5 minutes to sort of stop the brew process some, right? But I think we've waited about 10 minutes here, probably.
Well, I feel like there's some latitude there. I don't feel like, it's supposed to be 4 minutes in the cup of excellence and 3 minutes, 5 minutes. I don't know. But being consistent, I think, matters a bit, so we should probably move through. This Caicedo is amazing, Dan.
It's really nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Boy, I wish you guys could smell this.
Yeah. The Don Ruben. Yeah. It's really nice.
Don Ruben. Yeah. I mean, we all know this coffee pretty well, right?
Yeah, Caicedo it's a special place. It's been harder to work there than what we would have liked. It's a municipality it's pretty far out. It's near Urrao, but it's connected through a back road in the back. A back road. It takes a little bit longer even than to get there even than Urrao. And we have a group of producers really high altitude, actually higher altitude than Urrao. So the geography is completely different. Urrao is a valley. Caicedo has a lot more of those steep mountains that your guys are used to seeing in Colombia, right? Urrao is this valley at high altitude, but Caicedo can get up to 2,000. We've seen coffee at 2,250 meters in Urrao. So the one you're drinking is, I think, 2,150, Leo, right? Ruben's farm is at
right.
But still, it's very hard. I mean, only in some parts of Narino and in Caicedo have we really seen coffee grown at that altitude. It's really not very common in Colombia. And yeah, Caicedo it's a really nice place, and this farm is it's really special. He actually tells you that when he bought the farm, he purchased it because it was so cold that they told him that they couldn't grow coffee there. And that's why it was so cheap. So he had saved from being a picker and all his life, tried to save to buy a piece of land. And he eventually purchased this land that was worthless to grow coffee. And then how the weather has changed, and we can go on forever on climate change here, but the weather has changed and he's been able to produce coffee there, and he produces amazing coffee at this altitude. And now he has one of the most successful small farms in the area. So it's kind of a nice story behind it.
Yeah, it's interesting how, around Caicedo, just I hate to say someone's benefited from global warming, but just a couple degrees makes all the difference, right?
Yeah.
People should be speculating on, being just outside of certain climate zones on any crop, and they could probably eventually, end up with the prime real estate for any kind of agriculture. But
yeah, they are actually. I was reading, I don't want to get too digressing, but I was reading an article about people buying a lot of land in like Canada in areas that now are affected by permafrost, and now they're buying them for really cheap because they think they can eventually grow soya beans and stuff.
Right.
Anyway, and you see it here too with avocados. A lot of people are buying land that now might be cold for avocados, but might be warm enough in 10 or 15 years. So
For me, for example, I don't want to call like climate change. For me, the correct words are we are destroying the planet, which is the real words for me.
Yeah. I mean, you need stronger language where we're making changes to it that are could be one directional, and they're going to in the meantime, if there isn't correction, are going to lead to changes in flora and fauna that don't come back, especially in terms of species. So
yeah, that's a whole podcast that we could do about what how we look at it from our perspective in coffee and what you guys see.
Yeah. It's interesting that it's very in northern latitudes. It's sort of a cerebral thing. People don't. The rising sea levels. Today there was a thing about flood insurance. That oceanfront homes and then waterfront homes are going to experience these huge shifts in their cost of their insurance in the United States because they're actually remodeling the real threats of rising levels of sea levels, etc. But yeah, let's get back to coffee. I mean, it's very real in coffee. Yeah. Climate change is very real to producers, and I think Colombia is one of the more dramatic ones where you can just see it. It's not cerebral, it's not theoretical. You just go look, and you're like, yeah, that guy can't, grow coffee anymore, and these diseases were never here, and they've decimated this whole area. And anyway, we are on the Buesaco Alianza Granjeros. We talked a little about it before you guys joined in, but
yeah, maybe I don't know. So we just gave real brief backgrounds on the buying projects that these coffees are from, and so Alianza, I did my best to just explain how you operate out of the Alianza warehouse as a separate buyer essentially, but you have an agreement with them where you're able to use the coffee lab and storage facility and so maybe you could just talk a little bit more about it.
Yeah. Remember that we talked earlier this year that this year we're working on a different way of buying in Buesaco. So what we actually set up this year was we had a lot of working in that way with Alianza because we were having to basically compete with all the other programs that were in Buesaco, which is a highly competitive, setup, without having actually kind of like our presence there. So we were just one more buyer within Alianza. Mm-hmm. And last year we had a lot of issues kind of connecting to the same growers. So this year we started a new model, and we're actually working with Felipe. So Felipe is Leo's brother, and he helps us source coffee in Urrao. But because Urrao doesn't have that much of a harvest during this time, Felipe can focus on Buesaco, and we actually set up a buying station there, and we've been purchasing coffee there throughout this mid-year, and we've actually been super successful at expanding the program there and kind of developing more direct relationships with growers this year. So we've changed a little bit the operation of what we were doing before to what we're doing now in Buesaco.
So just ignore everything I said at the beginning of this podcast about the Alianza Granjeros lot. But I'm sure you're still buying from a lot of the same producers because you've been working there for several years.
We actually have a really good working relationship with Alianza, and they still showcase us like coffees that they're receiving. But we are definitely it was a lot more efficient to be able to set up that warehouse and work directly with a lot of growers that were having just too much noise in the market and weren't delivering the coffee to Alianza. So we were able to have a much more direct relationship, have been able to actually control the buying price, because that was the other thing that we were having an issue with Alianza, was that they had their buying price for everything that they were purchasing, and they do a lot of commercial too. So a lot of the times they weren't able to commit to higher prices off the bat. So that was basically not permitting them to be competitive in the market. Now with buying, we're buying only specialty, right? So when we're buying only specialty and Felipe is cupping, everything that we cup is at least 84. And actually most of what we purchased in Buesaco was actually above 85. So we could pay a base price of 85 directly to the producer. And that helped us to be a lot more competitive, but it's the same producers. Right. It's the same areas. It's just the way that the logistics actually worked.
Yeah, sometimes you really have to segregate specialty level coffee from commercial. Somebody that does both, you think that's an advantage, but at times it actually ends up being a disadvantage and having not being able to function in a certain.
It's a double-edged sword. I mean, I guess in the way that the bigger guys that buy commercials, in theory, they get access to a lot of coffees, and then they can see which is really special. But when you're working, just commercials are so much volume that in terms of the operations of these warehouses, if they're buying commercials, all their operation is going to a commercial because it's just too much volume, too much money. And specialty is at the end, specialty is small. It's smaller lots. It's 50 kilos, 100 kilos, 400 kilos. Every lot has to be separate. Every lot has to be marked. Every lot has to be sampled. So it's just, and that's something that's been recurrent in most of our work when we try to work with either, associations or guys that are big enough to buy commercials. It's just, everybody says they want to do specialty, but when you go into the heck of the harvest and coffee's flying everywhere, and you're telling him, "Oh, that 30 kilo lot is super special. Please keep that separate." It's like yeah, and then just everything gets messed up. So it's
yeah. We were talking about that, just in terms of even just our containers that come into the port here locally, and how they're a lower priority to deal with because they're full of so many different coffees, where it's just a lot less physical labor to manage 320 bags from a single box. It sounds sort of similar in a way. I mean, you're talking about a lot more separate lots, but just the fact that it takes a lot more labor to manage a bunch of small coffee lots, as opposed to.
Well, fellas, let's talk about the Aponte honey. So, Leo, are these honeys? Are these basically home processed? Then each producer is producing their own honeys on patios separately, right? So.
Each producer dries the coffee in their houses or whatever in parabolic plastic,
right.
or pot, for example. And then we collect the coffee in Aponte village in a warehouse there. They send the samples to us, and we cup and select the coffees for these honeys, 86 and above.
We haven't really discussed what honey processing is in this conversation yet, Tom. Is that something maybe we should really quickly touch on?
I don't want to go deep into that, but it's just, you peel the skin off the fruit and you dry the parchment, what you would normally have fermented and washed off the fruit. You're drying it on the outside of the skin, and that just... Now, why that's different and how that changes the dynamic is a really long... why are honeys different from naturals? And there's a whole range of honeys that are very similar to, there's a whole range of honeys that can be almost like a natural or almost like a washed coffee. So it really depends on a lot of factors. And Leo, what do you think are the main factors that define why drying the parchment with the fruit layer on is different? Why is it
obviously the for me Ponte honey is very special because the weather conditions there. For example, you can find the people call el páramo, which is the condensation of water in the air. It's very particular in Narino. So during the harvest and during the drying process, you can find low temperatures with almost 30% of humidity. So it means that you can dry the coffee even if it's raining or with low temperatures. That means that the coffee it's fruity, it's winey obviously, but also you can keep the black tea, plum, those kind of notes. For example, when you make honeys here in Antioquia, they tend to be more like wild, over fermented in some cases. So the weather conditions, depending on the temperature and the airflow, the humidity in the airflow, you can find smooth or soft honeys or maybe wild honeys.
Yeah, it's interesting how we segregate. We talk about the flavors in a coffee, and then we relate it to it being honey coffee, let's say. But honey coffee from one place, even within one country, that we go, I love Colombia honey coffee. This is, we find these things reduced to these really big sort of baskets, of like everything's kind of thrown together, and yet. Really what's defining it is very different from region to region. It almost shouldn't be called the same thing. I think that's what I feel like with honeys. I mean, they span such a range. One word really doesn't express, what it is that you might get in the cup. And I guess we're stuck with that, but I think part of what you just explained really speaks to how different, I can't think of an analogy. If you do this certain method on this thing, universally you should have this result. However, when you do this certain method to this something, and then over here you get this result, over here you get this result, over here you get this result, you can't use the same name for those things, So
we do it with wet process though too, and I mean I think that's Colombia is a great example. We were talking earlier in the conversation about what's unique about Urrao and Caicedo mixing multiple days of multiple harvest days, and it's still wet process coffee, but the result and actually the process is quite a bit different than the majority of fully washed wet process coffees that you see out there. So
yeah, and something that I wanted to add about the Aponte, which I think makes it really special, is that normally honeys are done by bigger states or medium-sized farms, because a medium-sized or a larger farm might have a more direct connection to the consumer that says, hey, could you please try this, and then it might have the infrastructure to actually test it out, and it actually can take the risk of not working and then just saying, hey, a small part didn't work, but it's okay because I have the rest of my farm to produce washed and to sell it normally. Because if a honey doesn't really sell as specialty, if you take it to the local buyers, they're going to say there's something wrong with this coffee, right? They're not going to value the quality of honey, so it's actually going to sell for lower than what normal commercial coffee sells for. So we're really careful when we work with smaller producers to promote honeys, because it's a risk. If we tell them to produce naturals or honeys and it doesn't come out right, we have to be able to purchase that at some level, because if not, they're going to lose their production. What's special about Aponte is that everybody there is a really a small producer, and we still don't know what happened. Let me just move here for a second. We really don't know what was the reason why they started to produce honeys in the first place, but it's a whole community of growers that produce honeys in really small farms. And produce lots of it, because finding the amount of we do mostly focus on micro lots, but we do have a lot of bigger lots as well that are honey processed. So it's something. Aponte is really special. Like, I haven't really heard of any other community anywhere in Colombia, and I don't know if you guys have seen it in other parts of the world, where they produce specialty honey in those sorts of scenarios. Like, you always see it from larger farms, from
smallholder, yeah. And that's what's going to be part of my point with Leo, is like they're getting amazing consistency here, or you guys in the selection process are helping to get a consistency here, because I think it's been consistently really a great coffee. And I know Leo's going to have a comment on this, but I think this is what you're saying, Pedro, really goes to me also to the consequences of the buyers and the marketplace following these trends with different crazy processing methods, and the people who can afford to do that and not really risk that much are these sort of large entitled estates, and people that it's like, okay, yeah, we'll try your triple fermentation, anaerobic
maceration,
demacerated, because it's no skin off our back. But you start sending that message to small producers, and they're taking a huge risk, and unless someone's committing to it, like, hey, try this thing, we're going to buy your coffee no matter what at this great price, and then go ahead and do it. But I'm not so sure these things work out when you get down to the small farmer that's risking a lot more. I think it's important to be conservative. I think honeys are fairly conservative as a method, as a variation in processing. But some of these other things really take a lot, and the potential for the small guy to lose on it is pretty high, unless somebody's guaranteeing them a price.
Yeah, and we have to remember, like, we sometimes in specialty we kind of just revolve around these very special, one-off lots or very renowned farms, because it's part reality in terms of the quality of the coffee, part marketing. But the power of specialty is really to to be able to reach, hundreds and thousands of small producers. That's where the power of specialty really is. So when you're thinking about processes that can actually reach all these, communities and growers, you have to think about processes that, are simple enough to be able to reproduce, and safe enough to be able to reproduce. And at the end, what we realize is that, these coffees, I think, and I might be biased, but I think they're as good, as any of these, really sophisticated, really high marketing sorts of special lots, right? And there's something special about it. I don't want to dismiss the others. We have part of our business is being a larger farm and also doing honeys and naturals and trying new stuff. But I think there's so much value in these coffees that can be produced by, smallholders, large communities like Aponte. And it's one of those, things that you just come up against in our, our work in these communities. So it's really nice.
Yeah.
We've talked about the range of flavor that you find within, honey processed coffee. Do we want to, I'm sure people are wondering how this honey tastes. Maybe we should talk about what you're tasting, Tom, or,
Yeah, let's just, work the coffee into this discussion. But
I think it's interesting to have we poured a cup before we started the call. It's sort of like Martha Stewart having a baked cake already ready when you're, throwing one in the oven. But having a warm cup or a hot cup next to a cup that's cooled significantly, it is interesting to taste those flavor differences. I don't think that this honey is particularly of the fruit-forward variety. I think it's a really sweet cup and it has fruit. I kind of maybe get some apple or something like that in the cooled cup. But for me, I think this tastes in line with some of the, like a cleaner washed coffee. It doesn't have that wild ferment flavor to it. It's acidity might be a little bit rounded and not as pronounced as some of the other wet processed coffees that we buy, but it has acidity, it has really nice sweetness to it. I don't know. What are you getting, Tom?
I mean, I get the fruit. I think it has some strawberry, but I think the body is really, really nice. It just has a very good heft, completeness kind of to it. It just feels, it feels thick. But the acidity, what I really like is, so often with fruity coffees, when you lose acidity, the fruits just kind of become, I call them flabby fruits, and I don't even know what that means. They're just like, they're formless.
Yeah.
And acidity gives a kind of structure. It gives a kind of offsets that fruit. And this coffee just has so much nice acidity in it. It's really surprising. That really strikes me as a honey, to have a honey with such a nice kind of slightly bracing acidity, and then these other aspects of like really kind of complex sweetness. And
got a dog
can you
down
hear
there?
that?
Yeah.
That's Bob, the dog, who's trying to make a nest in the, it's like he came up here and he's trying to like dig a little hole. I don't know. So, well, anyway, I get what you're saying about this honey being special, and something about the climate in that area producing this this type of cup, because, and also that the producers are doing a really good job in the drying, and then you guys in your selection are weeding out anything that might have gone sideways,
Yeah, and we don't. To be honest, we don't really see from that area like some of the honeys that we sometimes have cupped from from other areas of that really heavy fruit, almost natural like profile. Yeah. And as you said, like I've talked to Leo a lot about this, about the acidity of these coffees. I think these are also very high altitude. Aponte is around 2,100 meters, really cold. It has a really microclimate is a very commonly used, probably bad way in coffee. Just everything is a microclimate.
Yeah, our warehouse has a microclimate.
Yeah, exactly. At the end, everything is a microclimate. But Aponte has let's not call it a microclimate. Let's call it something really. It has a really special, not only vibe, but it has this. It's a valley. It's really cold. It has a lot of wind, and very different from Colombia in general. It has very marked seasons. So it's not always like in Antioquia. It's always either really sunny or very wet. But Aponte has this weather they call paramo. Paramo is, I don't know how to translate. Do you know how to translate paramo, Leo? It's like
condensation of water in the air. But it's natural.
It's like when it's misty and cold, but it's also windy, which is weird. So when they always call it, they say the paramo is coming, and they also refer to paramo like really high altitude areas. So it's like this misty weather. And it usually happens in the morning and the afternoon. So it has a really special weather, and we don't exactly know if how this affects the final cup. But we always see very clean honeys, and the acidity definitely helps to balance that fruit and to make it clean and crispy and not like vinegar and thick and which sometimes you feel with like more natural like honeys, which that fruit just overpowers everything.
Dan, do you want to talk? Let's just talk. Let's just taste the San Antonio and the others really quick, so we can just say we did. San Antonio is really solid. I almost feel like this acidity's got a slight citric element, which I've never really found with that coffee before. What are your thoughts on it?
I think it has a really nice clean sweetness to it, which we find in a lot of the coffees that we buy from that area. For fruit, I sort of get like it's blackberry, but it's more like a tea or something, It has this kind of crisp blackberry tea in there that, in the warmer of the two cups, it sort of feeds into a bit of a tannic finish. I love it. I think it's great.
I do get a slight green element, but kind of a lime zest or something. It's unusual. What about the Kaisedo?
We call that note a lot ciruela, right, Leo? I think they're referring to what we usually call maybe like ciruela.
Ciruela, yeah.
Which I don't know how to ciruela is like a type of it's not a plum. It's you've had ciruela. It's the red fruit that there's very common in our farms. That is kind of tart, but it reminds you of like a mix of black tea and honey. I don't know. It's weird, but we call that ciruela usually.
Huh? How do you spell it? Ciruela. What?
CIRUELA.
Huh. Well, it's a type of plum. Yeah.
But it's not like you say plum and you think of something else. You think about something.
And plum is there's so many kinds that are so different. My joke is, well, I found myself doing this, saying, that this coffee really had this dried plum in it, but not saying prune, which I thought was. Well, but I guess prunes are specific varieties they use, for prunes. So maybe.
Yeah, what do you think of the Caicedo?
I'm so impressed. Like, it's just the clarity of this coffee really strikes me. It just is very, again, nice acidity and well structured. It's very different than a Rao. Huh?
I think this particular coffee is, yeah. Sometimes with the Rao we get the black olive kind of. It's not metallic really, but there's something about the acidity and flavor that brings out this note that I think we refer to as black olive, and it's not bad. It's just it's very unique. But I feel like this doesn't have any of that. It's I'm getting fruit for sure.
Yeah.
Tom, I don't know. I think we were maybe it was just me on the fragrance and aroma, but even in flavor, there's a bit of a spice note to this coffee to me. It's like clove or something.
I get it in the finish. For sure. What do you guys? I mean, from your memories, what do you think of this coffee, of the Kaiseto? What's your sort of taste experience, Leo, of the Kaiseto lot?
The Don Ruben.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. Actually, Don Ruben, he has bourbon mixed with caturra, so it's a kind of mix of flavors between caturra and bourbon. And yeah, for me, it's a kind of plum, black tea. It's very, very good coffee.
Yeah.
I should mention this is the only coffee from Caicedo or Arau. I mean, they're two different towns, but they're close to each other, and it's the only coffee from that area that we're going to have in this container. So we'll see more probably towards the end of the year. Is that correct?
The mid-year crop was a little weak, and the main crop is not coming on particularly strong because we've had just so much rain this year. We've had basically nonstop rain since late last year. But we will. Urao just naturally produces more coffee in November and as well as Caicedo. So we probably will have a bigger offer of especially of Chirosos. I think there's one Chiroso in this container, or I'm not sure. No.
This is our only Caicedo Urao coffee.
Yeah. No, it's definitely gonna probably for the container that we hope to build in December, January, like we usually do from that area. Mm-hmm. It's gonna be much more heavy on the
And
this Buesaco is surprising to me too. I get almost like a peach tea, like some stone fruit with a little bit of tea in it too. Really nice. Surprised because aromatically it didn't really jump out at me so much. So
we have it in our stores actually right now. Very similar to that coffee. We joined I think it was four lots from Buesaco, and we're showcasing them in our stores, and people have really liked it. It's very unique profile, very delicate, and the acidity is very crisp. But people have liked it.
I'm surprised at just how light a roast this is, how sweet the coffee is. I mean, it's really sweet and almost has, for me, I get some of that like torched sugar kind of sweetness underneath it. And it's, it's a very light roast, so it's pretty impressive. I think, in that regard.
Yeah, let me see if this works just to show. I don't know. Can you see that?
Yeah, a
little bit.
We can post some photos too in the.
Oh right. I can't aim this. Yeah. It is light, but I think it's a really nice roast there. Yeah. We have a little ad for Volt Cafe going on there too.
Most of our sample roasts, we're shooting for first crack around 6 minutes or so, and finishing within 2 minutes in general, I would say. These are all probably about 1 minute 45 seconds to 2 minutes.
This is the honey, which just really
it's so much darker.
Appears dark because of the dark silver skin. You have that dark silver skin that's stained in the honey process, and it makes you think the coffee is a lot darker than it is. It probably is a tad darker in the roast. Dan, you roasted these on the Quest?
I did, and I think it's a good point to make for those who receive the Aponte honey or buy this coffee. The green is really dark. It has that silver skin still intact and even some fruit. So there's not only is the physical coffee darker when it's unroasted, but eat from one bean to the next, the consistency varies. I mean, and I think that maybe has to do with some of the home processing, or I don't think the consistency of the quality varies, but it just has a very unique look. And the coffee, when you roast it, will look darker all the way through roast progression, and then it will also produce quite a bit more chaff, which can, that alone can, I think, make roasting a little bit more difficult because if you're judging by physical characteristics.
Yeah, funny story. We just had the Aponte as a kind of a little special edition in our shops, and we got this kind of angry mail from a very usual customer saying, "Hey, you guys, I always love the way you roast, but this honey it's complete, it's burnt. It's like it's completely different from everything else. It's like." And then like 2 seconds later, he writes an email saying, "Hey guys, I'm sorry. I just grinded. I just brew it, and it just looked like it was darker, but it tastes really nice." So it's something that honeys tend to look a lot darker when they roast.
Yeah, you got some angry customers.
You get a little bit of everything.
We do too. Yeah.
Especially the guys that always come back. It's like they know exactly what they're looking. Especially coffees that are new and like different. We just had a mocha too that was very interesting to promote because it was hard for people to wrap their head around that kind of like very spice, very peppery. I don't know. It was a really weird coffee that we had. It was a small mocha lot that we produced in our farms. We have like 500 mocha trees, and it was like, I think it was 20 kilos, Leo, or 25 kilos or something.
Yeah, 25.
And it was really hard to get people to wrap around their heads around the profile. And we got some, not angry customers, but saying, "Hey, I was." Usually special editions might be, a geisha or a natural or honey. That it's very easy to see the difference in that. But when you have that mocha profile, anything anyway.
Yeah, hard to roast too. Really different in the roaster.
Really small coffee.
Very difficult coffee.
Yeah.
Oh, guys, this went so far deeper into stuff than I expected. I thought we were just going to be like, "Hey, here's these coffees. See you guys." This is great, though. I mean, it really is. We touched on global environmental issues, economics, pandemic, shipping, changes in consumer patterns and impact. What else?
Yeah.
Rural economies. Yeah.
And a little bit about the coffee that's on the way, which is what the original concept was supposed to be.
Well,
no, it's great.
The way things go sideways in coffee is good. It's like, if all we ever did was just like, here is coffee, taste coffee, that's kind of boring. But coffee, first of all, the caffeine makes you start wanting to talk, and then it's like it connects to everything else, and that's why to me it's interesting. If it was just this thing in a world of its own that had no relation to all these other issues and all these other things that you care about, that would suck.
If you guys want to continue this sort of thing, we can start thinking about obviously keeping it light, but also if you want to go more in depth into one specific origin, like if we do, Urrao in December, we can talk a lot more about, Chiroso and the way coffee works there. Or for example, our project in Inza, which has so many layers. Even Buesaco, for example, like we could just go on for a while about, the history of the place and how it's structured. So I think for people that might be interested into like going more in depth into every origin, we can do something like that.
That's great.
I totally would like to. I feel like, in the one sense we touch on these different things, but we don't really go into them. We don't really, there's so much more to say, and it's,
Leo and I were doing a video that we wanted to just do a 101 about coffee, and ended up being a 2-hour conversation. And we're gonna just throw it out there as a 2-hour video and see like what happens. But yeah, it's easy to get carried away when you're talking about.
No, was it 1 hour and 45 of Pedro and 15 of
No, actually it was me asking questions, because Leo gets a little shyer in English than he does in Spanish. In Spanish, it's going to be completely the opposite. It's just me asking question and him just like going on.
It's like Leo with ping pong. It's like suddenly
right.
El Diablo. What was your nickname in ping pong? I can't remember.
Killer.
The nickname, the Saque de la Muerte, remember?
Yeah, the death serve.
When
my
served,
God.
yeah.
This guy is an animal. Jeez. He's like, I need armor next time, I need a face mask. All right. Well, thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it. I know you're really busy, so
Yeah, thank
No,
you.
thanks for having us, and let's plan the next one with time. And
yeah.
we're happy
Maybe
to
we
join.
can get from you where you think what maybe Inza or somewhere else that really touches on the things you want to talk about, because I'd love it if you sort of led us. A lot of coffee conversations. It's I think people don't need it to be about marketing the coffee. We're not trying to just sell these coffees, but we're trying to show like there's a lot that goes into this coffee as it shows up on a shelf. It's not like other consumer goods like here's your box of detergent. It's just there. There's a lot to say. And I think people are more interested. And we get a lot of people who want to really dig in and peel the layers off the onion and get down to something real. So I would love to discuss that.
Well, let's see how this new container builds up, and we can talk about what area you want to focus on. We'll plan it up for next month or something.
Yeah, sounds good.
Speaking of which, I think we both got to get to cupping here shortly and should have some results pretty soon.
Yeah, I've got another. I cupped 2/3 of the new arrivals, and I'm almost through the rest. So
I'm just
we'll get you some results at the end of the day. So.
All right, great. Cool,
All right.
guys.
See you guys.
All
Good
right.
to see you.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.